very proud that they're my acquaintances, my friends. Mr. Keeley, of course, was a member of our California State Assembly, as well as the former Santa Cruz County Treasurer, tax collector.
Well, we forgive them.
And Mr. Lane, of course, was a long Santa Cruz County City Council member, as well as the mayor of our great city here in Santa Cruz in 1992, 2012, and 2015. So with that, we would be more than happy to hear from you both about the affordable housing bond that you are working on.
Well, thank you very much. Seated okay? Would you prefer to be? Okay, cool. Given the size and shape of things here, I think we'll do it this way if it's all right with you. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and for the fine work that you all do on the commission. Don and I, after the 2016 general election, got together probably a week or two after the 2016 election and had some conversation about how the issue of affordability of housing in our community is not an issue unique to us at all. It's certainly an issue at a minimum throughout California, and especially along the coast of California, where housing prices continue to run away from people faster than they can save, and faster, frankly, than in many instances communities can, with regard to market conditions, accommodate affordability. And we thought and discussed this for a while, a few weeks, off and on, dangling conversation, and thought, you know, there's no shortage of defining the problem. We look at the paper every day, pick up the Sentinel, or down in Monterey, pick up the Herald, or in San Jose, pick up the Mercury News, and you can see letters to the editor, op-ed pieces, frankly, in general conversation with people around the community. My guess is, looking at you folks, there's probably not one of you that goes through one day without hearing a story about or engaging in a conversation about affordability of housing in Santa Cruz County, whether it's looking out this window right now and seeing the folks, a fraction of the folks who are homeless, or somebody comes home from college during the Christmas break or holiday break and says, oh my gosh, I really am never going to be able to live here. I'm getting this good education elsewhere, but I know I can't come back because I can't afford even renting, much less the aspirational notion of buying in this market. And we decided that we don't need to convince anybody of the need to address the issue. And the question is, what can we do as a catalyst to a larger, at least partial solution? So we both engaged in looking around at the ballot measures in 2016 that were on local ballots throughout California, Santa Clara County, Los Angeles, various places, looked at what they were doing with regard to affordability, and it looked like those communities wanted to create a capital fund of some kind that could then be brought to bear in the marketplace. And that perhaps that was something we might want to consider in our community. What we found was interesting, which was that every one of the ballot measures in 2016 that were on the ballot regarding affordability of housing passed. And we paused and had a bit of a reflection on that notion, which was, you know, we had on the same ballot the transportation measure. It was on about a long time to get there, a lot of negotiations, the community finally got there. And you could see how someone, an individual voter, would look at the transportation measure and say, well, I might not like this or I might not like that. But thank goodness we're doing something on a whole range of fronts. You know, paving some streets and doing some this and looking at the rail trail issue and the highway issue and so on and so on. But at least you could believe as a voter, because it's possibly true that you will directly benefit from voting yes on that measure. Now, some way, somehow, it might get better for you. But you look at the affordable housing issue and you say, gee, in Santa Clara County, for example, roughly 425,000 yes votes on a measure that got 2/3 vote, $950 million affordable housing money. And you look at that and you say, of those 400,000+ people that voted for it, will 1,000 of those yes votes directly benefit from it? Will they get an affordable housing unit? Will they become a first-time home buyer? Will they get a subsidized rental unit to make it more affordable? Will they? Probably not that many people. So it was more a statement about what kind of community do I want to live in? Do I want a community that is collectively doing something about affordability of housing, irrespective of whether I might get something out of that or not, directly? It's more indirect. So we started calling it the community compassion meter. Where's the community compassion meter on the issue of affordability of housing? In all of its manifestations, like we said, homeless issues, or first-time home buyer, or workforce housing, whatever it might be. And we thought, well, that's a really interesting indicator. When every community that had a ballot measure like that, whether it was a modest-sized community or a massive community like LA that had it, or a big county like Santa Clara or something, very interesting, one of those shared community value issues. And we thought, well, that's worthy of some more investigation, some more thinking about it. So we gathered a few people at my house for a while, talk about it. If you will, the doctor, the lawyer, the baker, the whatever, just trying to get a wide cross-section of our community to come sit down and begin a conversation. And that then grew rather quickly into what is now about 50+ people who have voluntarily said, gee, I'd like to be in that conversation. Got too big for my house, so we went down to the community foundation and said, could we hold these meetings here? And by the way, this has gotten too big for us. Can you fund a wrangler for us? Not a consultant, not a, but somebody who could do admin work for us to schedule the meetings and keep the flow of traffic moving along in terms of emails and that kind of thing. The community foundation did that. We have a place to meet. The affordable housing people who are in the business professionally, like Mid-Penn and others, said, well, we need some, in addition to general research on this topic, we also need to test the public view of what's going on in our community and their willingness to do certain things to help out. They paid for that. We got good results back, essentially saying that this is a very, to no one's surprise, a very, very high priority for people in this community. Lots of individual reasons why, but the predictable set of reasons you could foresee. Either they're being priced out, or they work a regular wage job in this community and are having very serious difficulties staying here. A lot of feedback about what are my kids going to do, and so on. And that led us to believe that this is an activity worth pursuing, where we don't need to come up with the idea that no one's thought about yet for how to solve this problem, but instead build on the success of other communities. And we kind of came down to this as a notion, and Don is going to have his point of view about this. But the way I look at it, in terms of the way people what have they come together around? It's probably important to say what they don't want to do. And that is, this working group that we've got is not in the business of being the shadow board of supervisors or the shadow city council or the shadow planning commission. It is not our business to decide where should this happen, how should this happen. Those are policy decisions that we elect people to make those decisions about that. But what we see and hear from all of the folks who work in the field is that they can all agree that there is a lack of capital to be able to undertake the activities that would be sufficient to move the marketplace at all. That, at least the people we speak with, don't believe you can regulate yourself to success on this. That if you said, gee, if we just told developers that instead of this percentage of housing, they need to have this percentage, we're going to be okay. Those are policy decisions people need to make. But I think there's common agreement, again, that the marketplace is running away from affordability much faster than our regulatory architecture could be in place that would solve the problem. So we're narrowing our view of the world in terms of solutions to capital formation on the public side of this that could be brought to bear in a market. I will tell you one very small story, and then I'll be quiet about this, and that is that when I was in the legislature, and as Mr. Honig knows, you should be afraid of any sentence that I start that way. But when I was in the legislature and the speaker and the governor said, why don't you try to figure out what's going on this energy crisis? One of the first things that my team and I realized is that the problem as defined was the wrong problem. The problem as defined was, we haven't built a power plant in California in 12 years, and we've added 500,000 people a year during that period of time, so it must be that there's not enough electrons in the system, so we need to waive every requirement and build power plants till hell won't have it. There we go, solution, on to the next thing. That was not the problem. There were plenty of electrons in the system. The system had been deregulated poorly, and it was a market manipulation problem. And the solution to the market manipulation problem, ultimately, was for the state to become a market participant. And that's when we solved the energy crisis. So we're trying to say, we're not trying to solve the wrong problem or apply the wrong solution to the problem. We believe there is a market participation element of this, that unless that's done, everything else collectively won't get it done. Let me be very careful about what I said. I didn't just say that if you do this, it solves the problem. We are saying that without doing this, the problem won't get solved. So we see this as a major contribution. And what is the this? The this is something like a $250 million general obligation bond issue on the November ballot, county-wide, which would then be allocated between the county and the various jurisdictions, the cities, 4 cities, to engage in capital activities where it is public-private or public alone. We leave that to them. This is not us sinking deeply into that business. It is saying, here's a pot of capital funds that can be brought to bear on this problem. And again, leave it to elected officials to decide upon, in effect, the appropriation of those funds. With dealing with first-time home buyer, dealing with workforce housing, dealing with some rental housing, and dealing with the issues around homelessness, which component parts of that are vexing due to the lack of the brick and mortar side of inpatient drug and alcohol treatment and other capital needs on that side of the equation. So we have been underway now for just over a year. We are continuing to meet, small group 1 month, big group next month, small group 1 month, big group the next month. All comers are welcome to the big group because the small group is simply a subset thereof. And it's people who are more willing to do things in between the meetings and so on, a little more of the worker bee side of the activity. Our goal is to work from here to some point in the spring or early summer, where there's then a ballot measure. At that point, we would have to shift from funding, for example, from the Community Foundation and others, hit a hard stop there because it's now campaign world. And we're not spending foundation money or public money or whatever on the education information side of it. And then go into campaign mode and hopefully be able to pass a measure on the November ballot. Thank you for your courtesy in inviting us here, and my apologies to my compatriot for having taken 20 minutes to do my 5-minute oath.
No, I'll take 20 minutes, 5 minutes to do my 20 minutes. So let me jump to some a couple of kind of key issues that are ahead of us that you may want to, collectively or individually engage in. You do one and then pass the set around. So we, Fred mentioned that there's other, a couple of other counties that recently did measures like this. And the two that we've paid the most attention to are Alameda County and Santa Clara County. And their approach was somewhat different. And so that's something that we've been wrestling with a little bit and will continue to wrestle with. And what I'm passing out is a little bit of a summary from each of those two counties about their measures. But the thing that I want to just highlight for you, or a couple of things I want to highlight are the decisions that still need to be made either by our community group or and finally by the Board of Supervisors, because they will be the ones hopefully in the spring that would say, this is the ballot measure, this is exactly what it's going to say, here it is, voters to accept or reject. One thing that is, the most obvious one is, well, how big is this measure? Fred and I have been working with, and the group has been working with the $250 figure, $250 million figure. I think that's a good ballpark figure, but we may need to massage that a little bit because it'll come, that figure then defines, well, what is the assessment that each property taxpayer will pay? And we may need to, we'll hear from the community about that and want to set our figure at what we think is 2/3 of the voters are going to say, yeah, that's a workable figure for me. I'm willing to make that commitment as a taxpayer. Another piece is something else Fred alluded to, which has to do with, well, how will the pie be sliced? There's going to be some defined amount of money. Is X amount going to be just for first-time home buyers, and another, and we assume the largest part being for rental housing, just subsidized rental housing? Is there a carve-out specifically for capital projects to address homelessness? So we think I think the general assumption is, yes, there will be something for at least those three categories. However, how much, is there a defined amount for each? That's still to be determined. Another piece that Fred also alluded to is the jurisdiction question. Alameda County, and you can see on this one of the pages that I passed out, they had a fairly complicated arrangement where essentially each jurisdiction got an allocation based on their regional housing needs number. They got a percent, kind of a piece of the pie. So in other words, half the pie was carved up into smaller pieces for each jurisdiction, and then the other half of the pie was left at a more regional level. So that's a question we also will have to take on, is how do we want to do that, something like that in Santa Cruz County, or do we want to do something more like what Santa Clara County did, which was not really do that carving up by jurisdiction. It was really more of a county-wide pool, and it was like whoever was ready and willing to build affordable projects would have the first call on that funding. So, and I think Alameda County sort of divided, went both ways in a sense. They said we're gonna have some for jurisdictions, but we're also gonna make sure that there's a big pot for wherever, wherever the demand is. So those are the questions we'll be wrestling with in our group over the next few months, and then again, the board of supervisors will wrestle with them as well. I think those are the points I wanted to touch on.
Be glad to take questions. We are, now that we've turned the page into the new year, we've been in informal discussions with supervisors and or their staff to keep them appraised of what we're doing. And now that we're in the new year, we will be making individual appointments to take the conversation to a more detailed level, the kind that Don is talking about, and getting the advice and counsel of the supervisors as to where they're the most comfortable and willing to place a measure on the ballot. Supervisor Leopold has been involved in those conversations and has attended a couple of our meetings. Other supervisors have either had folks there or have spoken with us individually. We are not trying to get anything other than clear communication right now about how we get to the place in a few months that a ballot measure goes to the ballot. That's supervisor business, so they will decide how they want to get that there.
It occurred to me, one other thing we might mention, we're still working on this a little bit, but we have this idea that if we have the funding and kind of the wherewithal to put it together, that we would try to host, perhaps in conjunction with the supervisors or in some other way, host meetings around the county, in different parts of the county, just to, in a sense, have the conversation we're starting to have with you now, just saying, here's what we're up to, and we'd like to hear your thoughts on some of the issues that I brought up, just go down, is this the right amount? How should we carve the pie? What's the regional division of the expenditure fund? So those are things, because we think that the supervisors will be more ready to move forward if they know that we've done our due diligence in kind of moving around the community and kind of just hearing people out and kind of incorporating that into what we'll presumably, in the late spring, we'll have a proposal that is not, I don't want to say fully baked in the sense that it's assuming that that's what the supervisors will adopt, but that we feel like it's a comprehensive package that they can either accept or tinker with to make ready for the ballot.
There is, as you probably also, I suspect you know this, but the state has an affordable housing measure that will be on the November 2018 ballot. It's a general obligation bond measure. It takes a simple majority to pass. And the reason that it does so is because additional obligation bonds approved by the voters have first claim on the general fund when the governor and the legislature are putting the budget together. So they have to take all that, whatever the debt requirement is, to pay that debt. That's our favored nation status is granted to self-help counties. There's a bit of that in the state's affordable housing bond. So we think it would be good, the same election where voters are not raising their taxes to approve a statewide affordable housing bond measure, we put a bond measure